lack of clarity. Okay, and so we looked at then, we spoke about hadiths. When we say a hadith is sahih, does it mean the Prophet said it? No, it means it is likely that the Prophet said it according to certain scholars. According to other scholars, perhaps it's not. It doesn't mean the Prophet did say it. It means that it is likely that he said it. So that's obviously a reason why we debate over halal and haram, etc. And so today's lecture, we'll be looking at reconciling conflicting evidence. So now I have chosen my evidence. How do I put these things together? So if we go to the next slide.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead, if you don't mind. Can we just slowly start from the first slide again?
Sure.
What happened was the audio was not going through. So if you don't mind, if you can just quickly start from here.
That's fine.
Yeah, so everybody's giving the thumbs up, saying the sound is working now. So we'll start from the beginning, inshallah, and then we can work our way down.
Okay, should I put this to the side for you?
No, your thing is working. It was, the sound is, no, your sound is good. It was the system was not sending the sound over the internet, but now it's working. So go ahead, you can start.
Okay. So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, As-salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya wal Mursaleen. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima tu'allimuna. وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So we remind ourselves of the concept that we're trying to get across is Islamic pluralism, plural. There's more than one way to understand the Deen of Islam. Okay, how we can agree to disagree, and we spoke about how essential this is on a social level, on a community level, on a world level, and how we can navigate these things. We emphasized and we quoted from the Salaf how it is very important to not engage in debate. 99% of the time, debate is harmful and not academic. 1% of the time, it is useful for academics. So let academics have those discussions. Otherwise, you do what you feel best with and move on. We spoke about the difference between difference between scholarly debate versus sectarianism. When you excommunicate somebody, you label somebody as a kafir. You don't agree with me, therefore you're not a Muslim, right? And we spoke about some of the reasons why. You can go to the next page. So we mentioned semantic differences, looking at the language. We don't understand the same hadith or the same verse in the same way. We spoke about how historical reliability varies. When we look through the mists of time and we're trying to understand what the Prophet ﷺ said or what he didn't say, we disagree on the clarity of that. Some hadiths are sahih according to some, not sahih according to others. And we said if a hadith is sahih, what that means is that the likelihood of the Prophet ﷺ having had said that, not that he did say it. So there's still room for debate. And today we're looking at reconciling differences. So the first is repeat ourselves. Go to silence, please, Khalid. So don't talk, just do. Don't be the person who is debating, just do. Next slide, please. And so we quoted, and we repeat this again and again from one of the Salaf, great Qadis of Iraq. He said, I swear that I have met in this very mosque 120 of the Ansar, and not a single one of them would ever narrate a hadith, save that he'd rather his companion narrate it. So don't be the person speaking. And he said, nor did a single one of them ever answer a fiqh question, save that he preferred his brother to answer it instead. And so don't be the person who is saying the halal and haram and these things. Always be the last person to speak. Bismillah. Right? And Al-Awza'i, he mentioned this. He said, it has reached me that when Allah Almighty, Mighty Majestic, intends ill for a people, the sign that things are not going to work out for you, and there's no barakah in your time, is you spend your time blasting people online about who's right and who's wrong. Don't do it. Just say, brother, you've decided Eid's on this day. Brother, you decide Eid's on that day. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Eid Mubarak. That's it. Move on. Okay, and so the idea that there's more than one answer. There's more. So what's the answer then? There isn't an answer. Half the time there's a clear answer. Can I eat pork? No, you cannot. Can I drink wine? No, you cannot. Do I have to pray 5 times a day? Yes, you do. Okay. But when you get to the minutiae, there's most of the time more than one valid answer. So don't look for the correct answer, look for the valid answer. Bismillah. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, well, how can we all be united then? Hold firm to the rope of Allah and don't be divided. Well, if we have different opinions, we're divided, right? Is that true? That is not true. Having different opinions is not true. If you go to the next slide, right? We said no. Divided is when you become sectarian. So it is not that I have an opinion, you have another opinion. It is that I see my opinion as the only answer, you see your opinion as the only answer, and now we hate each other, we turn our backs on each other, and we label each other as irreligious, we label each other as not Muslim, etc. That's sectarianism. Sectarianism is not having more than one way of looking at something, right? So we don't need to agree. It's okay that we have differences of agreement. The Sahaba had disagreement with Tabi'in, etc. We just need to agree to disagree and respect differences. And again, we need to look something about the history and the academics in order to say, okay, how is it possible that I can respect this opinion even though I don't understand it at all? So now next slide. So sectarianism is when you hear we're right and they are wrong. That's sectarianism. Okay, and extremism, treating a probabilistic proof. Could your proof be interpreted in another way? No, you're an extremist, because the hadith could be understood another way. Could you argue that the Prophet ﷺ did not say that? No, you're now an extremist, right? So how do you become an extremist or that? And we have the other side, the libertarian, who's like, oh, I don't care, everything's open, anything's open, wine maybe means something else. That's an extremist as well. Right? So treating something as probabilistic, etc. So now why do we disagree? Next slide, please. Okay, so we mentioned semantic differences, the language, trying to find out what the Prophet ﷺ actually said or did, and then how we reconcile these differences. So we should have in our mind now this picture. This is fundamentally important in our mind. This is like the mini periodic table of the Islamic chemist of life. How do I work with other people is this, okay? In my mind, are you talking about a quote from the Prophet ﷺ that is mass narrated like the Quran, like certain hadith, like certain basics of the religion? Or are you talking about something that's mentioned in one source? Okay, is it crystal clear, meaning the language could not be possibly understood in any other way, or could it be understood in another way? So that it's in my mind, I'm like, yes. So there's no room for debate in something crystal clear and mass narrated. Pork is halal. No, it's not. I think it's halal though. You're not a Muslim. Simple. I don't think I have to pray. I think prayer is optional. That's either ignorant or non-Muslim. As opposed to, there is genuine room for debate. There is room for debate there. And if you don't accept the room for debate, there is pride, there's arrogance, and there's narrow-mindedness, right? So now what we're going to do is you say, in this debate, we're going to find evidence. We found a hadith, we found a verse, but how do we put them together? How do we marry apparently conflicting evidence? Let's go to the next slide. So one of the first things you've got to define then is, what is your proof? So I come along and say, well, the proof are for Quran, Sunnah, consensus, if all scholars agree, and analogy. Somebody else comes along and says, well, I can add to that. And in fact, the majority of scholars add to that. So now, if we disagree on what the proofs are, do you think we're going to disagree on how to put the conflicting evidence together? Of course. Of course. So we're not even going to go into that, because that would even up a whole other kettle of fish, right? Which proofs are categorical and which proofs are probabilistic? It's very important. So what if I have something that's crystal clear and something that's not crystal clear? But I have something that's clearly the Prophet ﷺ definitely said these words, and something the Prophet ﷺ may have said. We saw last week, for example, how the Hanafis very carefully sometimes married these things together by saying, for example, we think the Prophet ﷺ said you have to do the Fatiha in prayer, and we know he said the Quran, so therefore the fard is reciting Quran, but the wajib is reciting the Fatiha. So they came up with their own nuanced way of putting them together. Do you think we all do the same process? No. We're not going to process the same information in the same way. Okay? Then which should take precedence? Maybe the most specific, maybe the most reliable, maybe the most this, maybe something the most agreed upon. There's various different ways that we're going to do this. So obviously, when we are looking at the various different proofs on this issue, we're obviously going to disagree, and we have to accept that difference of agreement. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's give an example here. Halal to eat even if not slaughtered properly. So can I just go to any shop in America, for example, and say, in America, the default is that a person is Christian or Jew or Muslim. So I say the default is that if I go to a shop, I think 75% of America is either Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. So therefore, that's the default. Okay? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said you can eat the meat of the people of the book. Right? Next slide, please. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, today all good, pure foods have been made lawful for you. Similarly, the food of the people of the book. So the default, I'm in Brazil, I'm in Russia, I'm in a country that the default of people is Christian, therefore their food is halal. So therefore, what's this whole question about zabiha, not zabiha? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say that. So you come along and say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the food of the people of the book, it's there. And I say, no. Oh, you disagree with the Quran? Say, no, I don't disagree with the Quran. I'm saying there's another verse that conflicts with this, and I'm going to put it together in a certain way. Bismillah, next slide. So previously in that same surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, forbidden to you is that which dies by itself, and blood and flesh of swine, pork, right? And that which other than the name of Allah has been mentioned, and strangled, and that beaten to death, and that is killed by a fall, and that is killed by being smitten with the horn, etc., etc., etc. So I'm saying one verse qualifies the other verse. You can eat the meat of the people of the book on the proviso, on the condition that this doesn't happen to it. So it has to be slaughtered Islamically. Yes, if a Jew or a Christian slaughters Islamically, fine. If they don't, then no. Or is it the other way around? Is it that or is it that you cannot eat this meat unless it's the meat of the people of the book? So which verse is qualifying which? Is it crystal clear, such that if I took one account of the other, I would leave Islam? No, it's not. It's not crystal clear. It's not crystal clear. So you will find a minority of scholars, very few scholars, for example, they said, yeah, that however a Jew or a Christian kills it, it's fine. As long as you would call this, you say, for example, they say, here's a priest, he asked to have some chicken for dinner, and they strangled this rooster. That's that is the food of the people who have been given the book. Here's a priest, for crying out loud. What is that? What else do you call it? So a minority of scholars, they said that, yeah. They said, that applies to Muslims, but if it's the food of the Jew or Christian, it's fine because that's an exception, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions it later on as an exception. The vast majority of scholars, they say, no, you can eat Jewish or kosher and Christian slaughtered meat on the condition that it's slaughtered properly. That's the vast majority. The former dhahib, they say that, etc. Right? But who's right and who's wrong? You can't say, Wallahi al-azim, these people are right and these people are wrong. You don't know. It is the majority vote of one and a minority vote of another. That's all. That's all you can say. Okay, next slide, please. So is it halal to eat Jewish and Christian meat, even if it's not slaughtered? The answer is we don't know, but 99% of the ummah says no. But 1% of the ummah says yes. So which is right and which is wrong? Allahu alam. Allah knows best. So now if I say you're right, or that if you say A or B, that you're an extremist. Either way, you're an extremist. Rather, the correct position is, this is what these scholars think is the right answer, and they are the vast majority. So I would advise you, brother, to follow that position, but it's up to you. It's up to you. Is this an issue of iman and kufr? No, it's not. So therefore, we're discussing earlier on with Brother Khalid, priorities in the deen. Is this the most important thing? It's not the most important thing.
I have a quick question.
Khalid, do you have a microphone?
Yes. So just like, we have a tawatur for all of the practices that, we see like prayer, everybody prays 5 times, everybody stand up, they have only 1 ruku, 2 sujood.
Yes.
Don't you think this like halal and haram is like enough, like spread out tradition that should have like a very clear tawatur on it? Like millions of people have been eating meat, and they have been interacting with like non-Muslims, Jewish and Christians, and then completely non-Muslim. Like when the people of Aslaf went all the way to China, I mean, there was no Islam, there was no Christian, there was no Islamic religions. How they managed it, and then what was their original stance, and don't we have a tawatur for there?
Yeah. So it's a very good discussion. Shouldn't it be obvious? The answer is it's for two reasons. It's not. Number one, the ikhtilaf of the Sahaba is just very broad, right? So what you see is there's many things that you wouldn't imagine. You're like, oh, how could they ever have debated that? So the breadth of the debate is A, very broad, broader than it is now. Okay, A. And B, sometimes the circumstances didn't allow that. So the Muslims, for example, again, they were interacting immediately. So who were they interacting immediately with? With Jews, Christians, and then Zoroastrians in Persia. So the Zoroastrians in general, the conclusion was we treat them as Ahl Kitab from the point of view of jizya. They have to pay the jizya. Yes, they can be citizens of the Islamic State and they're going to pay the tax. But they can't marry their women and we cannot eat their meat. Whereas for Jews and Christians, yes, we can. The problem then with Jews and the Christians is then they were practicing at that time and they were perhaps particularly groups. So as far as I know, and my knowledge is limited, the first discussion of this is in Spain. So perhaps then by that time, they're in Spain and with later versions of Christianity, that they're living with Christians in Spain, that those maybe intentionally did not slaughter in the same ways they had previously done, right? And then also sometimes technology, right? It'd be quite a normal way to kill an animal, not with a gun, because they didn't have a gun. Would I kill a cow with an arrow? Not normally. Most people would probably, if I had a cow, I'd tie it up and slaughter it. So then it's like, so sometimes just the situation doesn't allow you for that debate. Yeah, there are but it's something that would be, you say, well, surely this must be clear. It's not. There's just many things that are not clear. Many things are not that clear at all. Okay, you had a question? Should we discuss it at McDonald's instead?
So, like you said earlier, if 90% of the population says something is true and then 1% disagrees with it, like you said, for pluralism, both of them are equally as correct. Yeah.
They're both correct. They're not equally correct.
Okay.
But they're both. But the 99% cannot say the other people are wrong. You can't say that because it's not crystal clear, and that would be wrong. If they did it, they'd be extremist.
But if they're like 99.9%,
so that's for you and your relationship. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intentionally left it like that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He left the doubt. So now it's up to you. You're at the canteen at school. Everybody's eating this food. Do you want to be the person who said, Ya Allah, I avoided the doubt, or did I not? And that's what the Prophet said. He said, halal is clear and haram is clear, and between it is many things that people don't know. So there's the test. In life, should I sell my house? Should I not sell my house? Oh, I sold my house too soon. Should I do this? Should I not do this? There's the test. In your relationships with other people. This would clearly offend your wife. This will clearly not survive, but this is somewhere in between. What is the quality of your relationship? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put it in somewhere in between. Would this hurt that person? Would it not hurt that person? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given this thing spiritually, given certain gray areas, so it makes it easy for some people, and also gives you the ability to show your extra credit, right? This is all extra credit. If you want to do it, it's up to you. Right? It's like praying. When do you want to pray the prayer? Do you want to pray the prayer 5 minutes before Asr? Would you want to pray? Would you want to show that your love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? One of the Sahaba, I forget his name, Salaf, he said, I never did a single prayer come in except I was longing to pray that prayer. Like, oh my God, when is it Dhuhr time? As opposed to Dhuhr time, okay, I've got ages, don't worry about it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you that window for you to show. Are you somebody at the beginning, middle, or end? It's all halal. But where are you with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right. Okay, let's continue inshallah. So next slide. So do you need a guardian to get married? So this is all for Mi'raj today so far. Meet in the canteen. Now, can I get married at school without the girl's dad being there? Okay. This actually happened, right, in England. 12-year-old at the back of a school bus. So anyway, do you need a guardian to be involved? Can a woman get married without the wali, without a guardian, right? Next slide, please. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, and if you divorce women and they fulfill the term of their waiting period, do not prevent them from marrying their husbands if they mutually agree on fair terms. Excuse me. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, you are married to so-and-so. When she's finished her iddah, you have nothing to do with her. She's finished her waiting period, that is it. Can you now, for example, in certain cultures, you have a like patriarchal society where if you married me, now you have to marry my brother. Like you can't leave my clan. That exists in some places. Is that part of Islam? No, it's not. You're free and that's it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not prevent them from marrying their husbands. Give them freedom. If they come to mutual terms, then go ahead. So this verse, according to some scholars, is the most clear verse which says you don't need a guardian because the guardian is told, do not prevent her. The guardian could prevent her. So therefore, step back. She is an individual, and that's it. She has her own autonomy, and that's it. Imam Shafi'i said the opposite. He said this is the clearest proof that why you have to have a guardian. Because why would Allah tell you to not prevent her unless you were able to prevent her? So the point is, you're the father. She's been divorced. Don't prevent her. Cooperate. She now wants to marry somebody else. Even the verse says they're marrying their husbands. She's not even married to that person yet. But she wants to marry this person. And she says, Dad, I want to marry this person now. It's like, fine, cooperate with her. And so the verse could be understood in two different ways, semantics. Okay? According to some, it means a guardian is not needed. You're told back off. The other one who said, yeah, I'm only told to back off because I have that power. Okay? So the verse could be understood another way. In Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, in Ibn Majah, the hadith is somewhat borderline. Sahih according to some, Hasan according to others, etc. The Prophet ﷺ said, and in other cases as well, he said there is no marriage without a guardian. There's no marriage without a guardian, right? And this is the majority opinion of the scholars, is that a woman cannot get married by herself. She has to have a guardian. If she has no guardian, she's just going to go to the imam and say, Imam, you're my guardian, or go to the court or whatever it is. She's going to appoint somebody, right? But a woman cannot possibly get married by herself. It simply doesn't exist. Okay? That's the majority opinion. Next slide, please. On the flip side, Aisha radiallahu anha, she married off Hafsa, the daughter of Abdurrahman, i.e. her niece. So Abdurrahman is her stepbrother from Sayyidina Abu Bakr, right? So Aisha, she married off her brother's daughter, her niece, to Mundhir ibn Zubayr, while Abdurrahman was traveling. So here's a question. Is Aisha a wali? Is a woman a wali for her niece? The answer is no. So then if she married her off, she is not the wali. Therefore, a marriage happened without a wali. And interestingly, Aisha is also one of these people who narrates the Prophet ﷺ said, any woman who gets married without a wali, then the marriage is invalid, the marriage is invalid, the marriage is invalid. So that's a clear conflict here. Aisha radiallahu anha is telling us the Prophet ﷺ said one thing. Apparently she's saying that. Maybe it's weak, maybe she didn't say that. And at the same time, she herself married off her niece. Meaning, perhaps she just organized it. She just said, yeah, go ahead and get married. And she was a woman of prestige and people respected her, so they kind of like phrased it as she married her off. But actually what happened here was Hafsa, the daughter of Abdurrahman, got married with no wali. That's what happened. So do we reject this piece of information? Or do we go with the previous information? How does it work? Or is one answer right and one answer wrong? The answer is that's not correct. Right? And so we say it's an issue of debate. The majority of scholars say, yes, you have to have a guardian. Minority opinion says, no, you do not. The Hanafis, they say you do not need the validity of the contract counts without a guardian. Yes, you're sinful for doing that because you're not involving somebody who has a power to veto it. You're sinful, but it still counts. Whereas for a Shafi'i, Hanbali, Maliki, you're not even married, right? There was no, there's not a contract. There was no guardian. There's not a contract, period. Okay? Mikhail, you listening? Okay, Bismillah. Alhamdulillah. Okay, next slide. Musical instruments. Are they permissible? Are they not permissible? Right, Bismillah. Next slide. So, Imam Bukhari, he narrates. And importantly, if you see how he narrates, he doesn't say haddathana or akhbarana or anything. He doesn't say my teacher narrated to us. He simply says so-and-so said. In the normal way, when I say Mi'raj said, does that mean Mi'raj told me? Not necessarily. So we'll come to this discussion in a second. Anyway, so Imam Bukhari, he says, he quotes with the hadith, it says, from among my followers, the Prophet ﷺ said, from among my followers, there will be some who will consider fornication, which is haram, and the wearing of silk, which is haram, and the drinking of alcoholic drinks, which is haram, and the use of musical instruments, which is presumably haram, as lawful. So the language used seems fairly obvious in that they will wrongfully label it as halal. That's what you would assume, right? When you say there will be these people who say fornication is halal, i.e. even though it's haram. And they say wearing silk is halal, even though it's haram. And the drinking of music or drinking of alcohol drinks, even though it's haram. And using musical instruments, ma'azif, even if it's haram. That's what you'd assume, okay? So here we're going to make there's a number of assumptions here that the majority of scholars use, which is A, the Prophet ﷺ did say these words, that's our assumption, right? And B, that it's not haram for any other reason, right? We mentioned last week, for example, the Prophet ﷺ strongly forbade selling dogs and cats. Is it actually haram to sell a cat? No. We said the reason why the Prophet ﷺ strongly forbade selling cats was, can you remember Mi'raj? Is it it's on the assumption they have no use. Selling something, for example, can I sell this tiny bit of fluff here? So there's a tiny little thing of white thing right here on my throat somewhere on my finger, I'll sell it to you for $1 million. You can't do that. It has no use. You cannot sell something that has no use. If it has a use, go ahead. You can sell something that has a use, but it has no use, you can't do it. So we said the hadith said something and we interpret it another way. So we can look at this hadith, number one, and we can interpret it another way. But the most likely interpretation is the Prophet ﷺ said that this would happen. A hadith continues and they will be destroyed, etc., etc., etc. So that's why the former dhahib, they say, yes, musical instruments are haram. That's the position of the former dhahib. Do other positions exist? Yes. There are other exceptions according to some scholars? Yes. But the former dhahib, you ask anybody who represents any of the former dhahib, they say, yeah, it's haram. Okay, the next hadith. So Nafi', the freed slave of Ibn Umar, he said, Ibn Umar heard a pipe being played, right? A pipe. The word is mizmar, I believe, in the hadith here. That put his fingers in his ears and distanced himself from the road. So he put his ears, I don't want to listen to it. And so maybe the sheep are going down the road and the shepherd's got his pipe. So he distanced himself away from it so he couldn't hear. This is Ibn Umar Sahabi. Okay? And he said to me, can you still hear it? Right? He didn't want to open his, he didn't want to take his fingers out of his ears. Tell me when you can hear it or not. Okay? And I said, no. He said he took his fingers out of his ears and he said, I was with the Prophet ﷺ and he heard the likes of which I heard. A similar thing happened. There was a shepherd going down the street, going down the road with a flute, for example, and he did what I did. Okay? So, assumption number one, the hadith is sahih, and therefore the Prophet ﷺ most likely said it. Now, here's the issue, right? If you go to the explanation, if we go to the next slide, please, Khalid. So this is Abu Sulaiman al-Khattabi from Afghanistan, 4th century Shafi'i scholar from Afghanistan, right? He's in an area that are Pashtuns today, okay? And so his subhanAllah, he is from the place called Bust. They call it Bust, right? I think today is Asma, what do you call it? Asma? It's Lashkargah, right? Is that how you pronounce it? Lashkargah, right? Which is today Lashkargah, but it's called Bust, okay, an area in Afghanistan, okay? And so he says the flute that Ibn Umar, right, heard was a shepherd's pipe, as mentioned explicitly in other narrations, which even though disliked, even though it's makruh, cannot be judged by such a response as being strictly forbidden as other forms of flutes. And he continues. So he says, Abu Sulaiman, he says, if we look at what was happening here, the flute was being played. It was a flute that had a reason, it's a bit like a ringtone. And so this kind of thing is makruh. And the way that Ibn Umar did is he covered his own ears and didn't tell the kid, the other guy to cover his ears, right? That's like saying, for example, I went to a swimming pool and there's a half-naked lady and I'm like, oh, Mi'raj, is she still there? I wouldn't ask him to check if she's still there if it was haram. I wouldn't do that, would I? Right? Because if it's haram for me, it's haram for you. So the way he's behaving is if it's just not something that should be avoided, right? I don't want to listen to it, but you tell me if you can still hear it, right? And so one thing gives a sense that music is totally haram. The other one could possibly give the sense that either this thing is an exception, or if we do analogy, you say the fact that he allowed somebody else to do it means it can't be sinful. So therefore, we can use this, if you go to the previous slide, Khalid, right? So the fact that he didn't tell Nafi' to do anything, you can say that it is makruh or un-Islamic or something that should be avoided, unbecoming perhaps, right? As opposed to haram. And therefore the previous hadith should be understood in that same way. Meaning these people will waste their time, right? There's going to be a guy in his eye. These people at the end of time, they'll be wasting their time on their iPhones and doing this and this and this. What? Because it's haram or because it's a waste of time? So I might speak in a certain way and you might understand everything to be haram, but maybe it's not the case. So is there some evidence to suggest on the YouTube? Okay. Khalid, can you read it to us, inshallah? So what I'm saying is it crystal clear? It's not. Is this hadith crystal clear? It's not. Could the hadith be understood some way? How do we put it together? The majority opinion is, yes, it's haram. That this hadith, the Prophet said it, and this hadith, the Prophet maybe or not, majority of scholars, they say this hadith is weak, so it's not even evidence anyway. The majority of scholars say the previous hadith is sound, and there's no discussion previously. If you go to the previous hadith, Khalid. So this is in Bukhari, right? Everything in Bukhari is correct, right? No, it's not. It's not true. So, for example, Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, one of the great scholars of Muslim Spain, he said this hadith is weak. He said this hadith, it's in Bukhari. Bukhari is not revelation. Bukhari is an ijtihad, one of the greatest scholarly effects of looking at these things, but it's not ijtihad. He said this hadith is weak, even though it's in Bukhari. Okay? One of my teachers as well, he says the hadith is weak. He has a whole thing online, I can show it to you. He's like, this hadith is weak and da 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 da. Okay? That's not the majority opinion. That's the minority of scholars. They said this hadith is weak. So the whole thing is weak, or it can be understood in another way. Meaning music, because it's connected to these things. Music not connected to these things are totally different, right? And so can we put the two hadiths in two different ways? Yes, we can. But when I read the hadiths, the general picture is, that's kind of obvious, and that's why the former dhahib, you ask somebody in the Shafi school, is it haram to play a musical instrument? Yes. In the Hanafi school, yes. In the Maliki school, yes. In the Hanbali school, yes. Yeah, that's a form of dhahib. Do other positions exist here and there, and different scholars here and there? There are individuals. There are individuals, right? Go to Turkey 150 years ago, right? And you're going to be like, oh, they have a military band. You had Ottoman Khalifas who their skill was a composer. They composed music, right? Go to the Indian subcontinent, you're going to see music is part of the qawali, is part of the religious world, right? And so it's something, if you come along and be dogmatic about it, say the former dhahib say it, therefore it is kufr, or therefore it is haram 100%. You can't say the 100%. You say, brother, I'm not going to do it, and I don't advise you to do it. That's as far as you can go. You stop there. I don't do it, I don't advise you to do it, and move on. But you come along and say, it's haram by agreement, and everyone says haram, and in Bukhari it says this, you're misusing Bukhari. You're misusing the text, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Right? You had a question, Khalid, on YouTube?
Yeah.
So Ibn Hazm was good on the oud, right? Oud is like a medieval guitar. Right?
What about things that are ijma?
Issues of ijma, then so issues of ijma are not going to be on issues that are problematic, are probabilistic, right? So why do the scholars all agree on something? Because it's crystal clear. They're usually going to be like that case, or it's not crystal clear, but they agreed upon it, and then it becomes crystal clear because they agreed upon it, right? And so we can have a whole other debate and say, when you say consensus, what level of consensus? We can break down consensus into 18 categories. So if there's ijma on it, when? Time of the Sahaba, time of the Tabi'een, or thereafter. And do I know they agreed? Or do I think they agreed? Or is it possible that they agreed? Because the same thing happened in the past. The Sahaba agreed, that happened in the past. So I need to know, is it mutawatir that they agreed? Or is it sahih that they agreed? Or is it weak that they agreed? Right? And did they agree verbally? Or did they agree practically? Or did they, what's called ijma' sukuti? Or did they not say anything about it when it happened? When you say ijma', what do you mean? Okay? And so yes, if something is haram by ijma', or if you ask me, upshot, if it's not halal according to any of the form of dhahib, don't do it. That's my answer. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when do we draw the line? And when do I say, brother, you are wrong. What you're doing is wrong. Wallahi al-azim, you're doing something that is totally haram. And that's why we mentioned the Hanafis, they'll say haram and makruh tahrimi. Why do they use a term? Because they're saying we don't know, but we think. That's the language that they're using. But unfortunately, many people, Hanafi, they're extreme. Many people, not ulama, but some people, they don't understand, right? So they'll use language like that. They say fard and wajib. Why? Because we don't know. They're saying we don't know. We think this is the case. This is our ijtihad. This is what we are telling you to do. This is what we do, but we don't know, and so we're leaving that room there. I hope it makes sense. Okay, can you so go back one slide, please? So are musical instruments permissible or impermissible? It's an issue of debate. It's an issue of debate. 99% of the ummah, it is haram. 1%, it's halal. Right? Obviously, that doesn't apply to certain music in certain contexts, right? So hip hop, whatever, like you can get, I'm sure you can find some halal hip hop, but I mean, the lyrics are halal, but by default, most of the stuff, the lyrics are haram. Right? There's something, we're not talking about that. So we're talking about, say, classical music. Can I listen to Beethoven? That's the question. Right? Okay, next slide. So very simple. Mi'raj, you're my acid test today, if I did a good job or not. Very simple. Each scholar follows the probabilistic evidence, it might be right, might be wrong, that they find stronger, preponderant. So when a scholar says something, I'm saying, I don't know, but I think this is stronger. It's not an issue of right and wrong. It's an issue I've weighed them up and this is stronger than that. That's all they're doing. It's more likely the Prophet said this and it's more likely he meant this than that. That's what they're doing. Right? So this is a key thing to have in head. They're looking at what is most likely, not what is right. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, and here Tanqih al-Fusul by Imam al-Qarafi, one of the great Egyptian scholars, Maliki, he said, some have criticized Imam Malik, Allah show mercy on him, for narrating a hadith on cancelling a contract upon sight and then ruling contrary. So there's a hadith that Imam Malik himself quotes, and the hadith comes to us through Imam Malik. He said, when the buyer and the seller have a choice as long as they don't separate. So meaning, I sell you this phone, before we go and pray Isha, I say, you know what, I want it back. What we agreed and you want it back? I said, yeah. That's what the hadith says. Imam Malik rules contrary. He says, you don't have that right. I was like, what's your problem? You quote that Nafi', that's Nafi' we just saw. You're a student of Nafi'. From Ibn Umar, the Prophet said that, and then you do the opposite? So yes, that's astaghfirullah. How can you quote a hadith and then do the opposite? How is that possible? Imam Qarafi says, this in reality is a very normal, acceptable approach. What? You can quote a hadith and do the opposite? How is that a normal approach? Next slide, please. He says, every single scholar rules contrary to the outward purport, what is assumed, what is most obvious from the Quran and Sunnah, on numerous occasions. What? You go against the Quran? You go against the hadith? Yes. Why? Because the presence of conflicting evidence. Oh, that makes sense. There's another hadith that goes against what you're saying. That's true. There's another verse that goes against what you're saying. The hadith seems to mean one thing, but another hadith explains something else. The verse seems to mean something, but nothing explains something else. That makes sense, right? And this is what we gave the example of Dr. Watson versus Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, he's seeing more things. Dr. Watson sees, oh, he has blood on him, he must be the murderer. But it's not always that case. Bismillah, next slide. And when Imam Shafi and many people, this is quoted from all of the Imams, said, if a hadith is sahih, then it is my madhab, and you can ignore my madhab entirely. When that's quoted from Imam Shafi, and people unfortunately do this, they quote a hadith and say, well, this is Shafi school then. Okay? He said that with the caveat, on the proviso, with the assumption that there not be any conflicting evidence. So now I have to prove that there's no conflicting evidence. So the onus is on me. Before I start applying a hadith, look at conflicting evidence. So here we're going to give some examples. Bismillah, if you can continue, Khalid. Right? So every single scholar, they go with what is more likely. They weigh up things. You're looking at one thing. You're saying, wow, these potatoes are heavy. So, brother, it's a weighing scale. It's like this. So yeah, but they're very heavy. That's not how a weighing scale works. You have to weigh something up against something else. So you need to see both sides of the argument, otherwise you won't be able to weigh it up. And so somebody who's myopic, they're like, oh, but it's heavy. This is a proof. So yeah, but you need to look at both sides. And in reality, when they're weighing up, they have 10, 13, 14 things on one side and a whole bunch of things on the other side. Okay, this one, next slide. No one stubbornly ignores categorical evidence. So this is people have in their mind, these people, they don't follow the Sunnah. Those people, they're not following the deen. That doesn't exist. No scholar, no righteous scholar stubbornly ignores the truth. That doesn't exist. Rather, they are following other evidence that you're not aware of or that you don't personally think is as strong. That's all. But nobody is like, oh yeah, the Sunnah is one thing, I'm going to do the opposite. Nobody, that doesn't exist. Bismillah, next slide. So here's a question. Is the Sunnah revelation, Mi'raj? Here's a question for you. When the Prophet ﷺ says something or does something, is that a message from Allah? It is. It's revelation, right? So the Sunnah is revelation. Okay? Is the Hadith the same as revelation as the Sunnah? It's a record. You bought a phone in the shop and you got a receipt. Is the receipt the same as the sale? It's the record of the sale. If the record is correct, then it's the same thing. If it's not, it's not. And so a hadith is so-and-so saying that I heard my teacher say, that they heard, that their teacher said, that their teacher said, that their teacher said, that the Prophet said. A, the receipt may have changed. B, there could be other receipts that say otherwise. Maybe you bought a phone and returned it and bought another phone. He says, Wallahi al-Azim, he bought this phone. Wallahi al-Azim, I have it again. Maybe there's another receipt. So the example of the Prophet is one thing, the record of it is something else. This has to be in our minds because people see hadith as sunnah. It's not the same thing. Give me a hadith or don't talk to me. It's not like that, as we'll see in a second. Next slide. Are the actions of the prophetic companions indicative of the sunnah? So when I'm praying behind Sayyidina Ali, when I'm praying behind Sayyidina Umar, and I see him raise his hands or not raise his hands, or do sujood or not do sujood, is that indicative? Does that tell me what the sunnah is? What do you think? By default, right? Because if they were very, very careful about following the Prophet ﷺ, then surely yes. But did they know everything the Prophet ﷺ did? No. So yes and no. Do you think we can debate on this issue? Definitely. So we're going to see right now a classic, very simple reason why scholars disagree. Hadith says one thing, Sahaba did something else, or certain Sahaba did something else. And here there's an issue of, to what extent am I going to follow the Sahaba against the Hadith? It's not Sahaba against the Prophet ﷺ. Is this message as a sunnah versus this message of the sunnah? You following me? Right? Both are records of the sunnah, because surely the Sahaba by default should be following everything the Prophet ﷺ did. So do I say that they know more because they saw all the hadiths? Or do I say it's possible they don't know the hadith that I have? It's not a clear-cut picture. It's not clear-cut at all. Okay? Bismillah, next slide. Okay, what about the tabi'een? It's 8:40. Inshallah, yeah. Okay, so what about the tabi'een? So you didn't see the Prophet pray, but you spent time with the Sahaba. Do your actions tell you what the Prophet would have done? No, because there's 2 generations before. Yes, because I prayed behind Ibn Umar, and I prayed behind so-and-so, and I prayed behind so-and-so, and I prayed behind so-and-so. Right? They said with Sa'id ibn Musayyib, the son-in-law of Abu Hurairah, he knew more about the judgments of Sayyidina Umar than the people of his time. So the certain tabi'een, you're a specialist. My whole life, all I did was find Sahaba and tell me, how do they pray? So is that not indicative? If you saw a tabi'i praying like this, or like this, or like this, or whatever they're doing, is that not indicative of what the Prophet would have done? Yes and no. Yes, because they spent time with the Sahaba and they saw these different things, as they have a very good idea. No, because they didn't see the Prophet pray. Can we see this picture? Right? Bismillah, next slide. Right? So the benefit of hindsight, the fact that you come later and you've seen lots of things. Okay, next slide. So there's 2 particular individuals, among others, who are very, very important in Sunni fiqh. super unbelievably important. They are some of the greatest muftis of the time of the early tabi'een. Right? They're giving fatwa during the time of the Sahaba. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i in Iraq and Sa'id al-Musayyib in Medina. You will find countless fatwa that he gave and everybody applies because he was this like powerhouse. So here's a question. I have a hadith, it's in Sahih Muslim, and I have a fatwa of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Which is stronger? Hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said these words, presumably. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, you were giving fatwa during the time of the Sahaba. Other tabi'een would come to you, right? So if you look, for example, at the Hanafi school, 90, no, I wouldn't say 90, I'd say 80% of the Hanafi school is just the fatwa of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Not even Imam Hanifa anyway. Why would he be so important? Because he was the key scholar of Iraq. Everybody go back to him. Everybody respected him. So am I going to go with one of the greatest fuqaha of the tabi'een, or am I going to go with a hadith in Sahih Muslim or Bukhari? Is it crystal clear how I weigh the conflicting things? No, it's not. Not at all. So naturally we're going to debate. Inshallah, we'll come back after the prayer and we'll discuss these. Subhanallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, obvious conflict is hadith versus hadith. That's easy. Verse versus verse. Verse versus hadith. Hadith versus verse. That's easy. But a very important thing that many people aren't aware of, because they equate hadith with sunnah, that when you have a fatwa of someone like Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, who they probably never heard of in their life, or Sa'id ibn Musayyib, again, who they probably never heard of in their life, and they're just confused because they find this person says something and it's contrary to the hadith or contrary to a verse of the Quran, and they just seem like they have no evidence. That's the kind of language they're going to use. They say, brother, I can understand if there's a hadith going against another hadith, but here you're saying, here's a hadith and I just don't follow it. Like, what are you doing? You're crazy. Because again, they're ignorant of the fact of the Sahaba and Tabi'een. Fiqh of the Sahaba and Tabi'een is incredibly important to understand. Incredibly important to understand. Right? The four madhahib is based on the fiqh of the Sahaba and Tabi'een. And so if you don't understand, you're not aware of these things, you never read them, then you have a problem. And there's huge books on this stuff. So, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i we mentioned, one of these great fuqaha of Iraq. Is Sa'id al-Musayyib, one of these great fuqaha of Medina, right? Sometimes you will find that their fatwa shifts the whole discussion, and you're totally unaware of it. So if you go to the next page, inshallah. So it's very simple. We said scholars often act upon the outward purport of a hadith. Often don't act upon it. So the hadith says one thing, they do the opposite. And the reason for that is because great scholars of the prophetic's companions, Sahaba, or the Tabi'een did the contrary. Okay, so we go to the next slide. So here's the question. We spoke about Jewish and Christian meat, right? That you can eat meat from Jews and Christians, right? And you can marry Jews and Christian women. Okay, so but what is the definition of a Jewish and a Christian person? So if you go to the next slide. Slide after that. So Imam al-Shafi'i, he narrates with a chain transmission that he believes is strong enough from Sayyidina Ali, Sahabi, and a great faqih, that he said, do not eat the meat slaughtered by the Christians of Bani Taghlib. Bani Taghlib, these are people, these are Arabs who became Christian. They were not originally Christian. Okay, they are Arabs who became Christian. And so these are Christian converts. They are not people who were originally Christian before Islam. So Sayyidina Ali said, don't eat their meat. So Imam al-Shafi'i, he says, a convert to Christianity is not considered Ahl Kitab. You can't marry a convert to Christianity, or a convert to Judaism, nor can you eat their meat. So what does that mean then? It means for the Shafi'is, when you say, oh, I'm in Brazil and I can eat, if as long as they slaughter it properly, I could eat meat slaughtered by a Brazilian. Like if a Christian in Brazil, he slaughtered an animal properly, does it zabiha properly, then I can eat it, right? Wrong. Well, why? He's a Christian. When did they become Christian? Over the last 500 years. They were all mushrikeen before. In Brazil, they were all indigenous people. They were something else. And then the Spanish came and then he converted them to Christianity, etc. So according to Imam Shafi'i, he says, yeah, Sayyidina Ali, and if you go to the next slide as well, he said, Sayyidina Umar as well, he said, the Christian Arabs are not people of the book and their meat is not permissible to us. So you're saying, Beba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this. Show me a hadith or show me the verse of the Quran. Imam al-Shafi'i is not hardly even using that. He is using Quran and Sunnah in reality. But he's saying that Sayyidina Umar said this, Sayyidina Ali said this. So he says, the fact that you're a convert to Christianity or a convert to Judaism means you're not really a Jew or a Christian. You can't marry that person, you can't eat their meat. Which would exclude most Christians today. Most Christians today would be excluded. And arguably, according to some, it would exclude all Christians. Okay? Next slide, please. So, yes or no? Again, you didn't read the hadith, you didn't know about that fatwa of Sayyidina Umar and Sayyidina Ali, and you're like, oh, it's obvious, it says the Quran, it says in the Quran, people of the book, these are people of the book. Yeah, but according to great scholars of the Sahaba and Tabi'een, no, that doesn't count. Okay, next slide, please. Taraweeh, mashallah, the favorite discussion. 8 rakahs or 20 rakahs, right? You look in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't even talk about Taraweeh in the Quran, right? It's not even there. It's not even there. And in the hadith, there's one weak hadith that says the Prophet ﷺ used to pray 20 rak'ahs, right? One weak hadith. Okay, next slide, please, Khalid. So in Bukhari, Sayyidina Aisha said the Prophet ﷺ did not pray more than 11 rak'ahs, meaning 8 rak'ahs of plus 3, in Ramadan or any other month. So if you read the hadith, we do not see 8 rak'ahs. It's 20 rak'ahs mentioned anywhere. There's a one weak hadith, yes, it's in Bayhaqi, he mentioned there's a weak hadith, fine. But besides that, you say, so if I say Quran and Sunnah, there's no such thing as 20 rak'ahs, it doesn't exist. Okay, then why did everybody say 20 rak'ahs then? The Maliki say 20 rak'ahs, the Shafi say 20 rak'ahs, the Hanbali say 20 rak'ahs, the Hanafi, why is everybody saying 20 rak'ahs? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, well, there's a whole piece of information that's lost on you. Next slide, please. Okay, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Oh, so that's our great scholar of Iraq. He said they used to, meaning the Sahaba and Tabi'een, they used to pray 5 sets of 4. So who's they? The Sahaba and Tabi'een. Used to pray how many rak'ahs? 20. Oh, that would make sense. Because that means if the Sahaba and Tabi'een, they prayed 20, that would make sense that I would pray 20. I don't understand, maybe the Prophet ﷺ prayed 8 and why they prayed 20, but they understand the deen better than I do. So I'm going to pray 20. Next slide, please. Imam Malik, he said, Umar ibn Khattab ordered Ubay ibn Ka'b and Tamim al-Dari to lead people for 11 rak'ahs. So that must be like 8. Next slide, please. Imam Malik said the people used to pray 21 rak'ahs in the time of Umar ibn Khattab. So I'm a bit confused. The previous one said something else. If you go back, so Umar said 11 and then something else. Is that a conflict? It's a conflict. I'm confused. So therefore, can I be categorical about it? No. So I say, Wallahi al-Azim, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and the only thing is 8. Or is only 20. That doesn't make sense, because why would most of the Sahaba pray 20, but yet here is something saying 8 and someone else is saying 20? I'm confused. So which one is right? Right? There can't be one that is right and one that is wrong. It's one that is most likely, which is most likely. Right? Next slide, please. Nafi', the freed slave of Ibn Umar, he said, I have only known people praying 39 rak'ahs. That's all. I've never heard of anything else. I've only heard of this. This is the only thing I've seen is 39. Way more than 20 and way more than 8. Right? I've only known people praying 39 rak'ahs. That's what I'm familiar with. Next slide. Right? Imam Malik is narrated to say 39 rak'ahs. He says, this is what we have been doing here for over 100 years. So Imam Malik died in 179. Right? So perhaps he said this in 170, 175. He said, since the year 70 or 80, Hijri, we have only known this. And in Medina, they prayed, 36 rak'ahs. That's what they did in Medina. 36 rak'ahs. Imam Shafi said in Medina, you prayed 36, everyone else you should pray 20. So I come along and say, but Hadith says 8. And I've never read this in my life. Of course I'm going to be confused. And of course I'm going to be dogmatic. And I'll say, no, 8. Here's a Hadith. But that's not the only thing. I've seen now 20, I've seen something else 20, and I've seen 36. Next slide, please. Imam Shafi said, I used to see the people in Medina praying 39 rak'ahs, and the people of Mecca praying 20. So clearly nobody's praying. Imam Shafi didn't say I used to see people praying 8. Never observed that. We've never seen Sahaba and Tabi'een praying 8. Right? We've never seen that. Next slide. Ibn Rahawayh, the great hadith scholar, contemporary of Imam Ahmad, he said, we prefer 41 rak'ahs of prayer according to what Ubay ibn Ka'b said. Notice he says we prefer. So i.e. he's privy to the fact that there are multiple different things. And he says, I think the best thing is 41 because Ubay ibn Ka'b used to do 41 rak'ahs and Sayyidina Umar put him in there. So we should do that. 41 rak'ahs tarawih, that's good. Next slide, please. If we look in the Mukhtasar Qiyam al-Layl by Muhammad ibn Nasr al-Marwazi, okay, you see his quote there. He quotes who prayed this number, who prayed this number, who prayed this number, who prayed the vast majority, maybe like 3 or 4, say 8. of the like 20 or 30 that he quotes, everyone's 20 or more. That's what you see the Sahaba and Tabi'in doing, 20 or more. So the person can only see one thing. He can see one thing. There's a hadith. That's all he has. There's nothing in the Quran. There's a hadith that says 8, and there's no room for analogy. That's it. And there's no agreement. So he says it's 8. The intelligent person says, yeah, but the vast majority of the Salaf prayed 20 or more. So none, surprise, the former Dhahib say, pray 20. The Shafi say pray 20. The Maliki say 20. The Hanbali say 20. The Hanafi say 20. Otherwise, I'm confused. Like, why on earth would I ever pray other than what the hadith says? Right? And so the fact that the Sahaba and Tabi'in, vast majority of them prayed 20 or more, that's why the former Dhahib prayed 20 or more. Are they right and everyone else is wrong? No. Not true. Not true. That would be extremist now. You're going to say this is what we agreed upon, and doing something else is most likely wrong. But I'm not saying you're wrong. There's a difference. Wrong is you're a kafir. Kufr. The Prophet ﷺ told you to do something, you're saying the opposite. That's kufr. You rejected his message. I haven't rejected the message. I interpret differently to you. Right? It's saying 8 is a valid interpretation, but it is a minority opinion. Next slide, please. So most scholars follow the majority and leave the minority. That's what we see. What you'll see is if you look at the 80%, 90% vote among the Sahaba and Tabi'een, and then look at the former Dhahib, it's basically the same. Simple as that. Anything that was a 10%, 20% is kind of ignored. And so what will happen today is somebody will go back, find that quote, find a hadith that backs it up and give fatwa on it. So we already reject, we know it existed. We already accept it as a valid thing, but we already said this is the stronger position. We've already had that discussion. And then they reinvent the wheel. Right? 20 rak'ahs. Yes, we already know it's debated, but the vast majority pray 20 more. That's why we do it. And then you're like, but there's no hadith. Like, subhanallah. Right, next slide, please. So giving salams, 1, 2, or 3. Do you say assalamu alaikum? Do you say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah? Or do you say assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum? Like what? I've never heard of that. That's a problem, right? If you haven't heard of it, then you're surprised by it, there's a problem. So next slide, please. So in Tirmidhi, the Prophet ﷺ is narrated to have said that the Prophet ﷺ used to give one greeting of peace, starting from the face and then turning to the right. Assalamu alaikum. Will you see this today? Yes. You'll see some Muslims doing that. Assalamu alaikum. And you should say, oh yeah, that makes sense because there's evidence that they're doing that. The next slide. The Prophet ﷺ here in Nasa'i and others narrated from whom? From Abdullah Mas'ud. So we mentioned Ibrahim al-Nakha'i before. So this is going to be part of the next discussion, not next week, but the week after that, right? When we start discussing the history of fiqh. When we say the Hanafi school, we mentioned which name was associated with the Hanafi school. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. We said 80% almost of the madhab is the fatwa of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. And no surprise, because he's one of the greatest fuqaha ever of the tabi'een. So it makes sense I should follow him. Similarly, this hadith is quoted from whom? From Abdullah Mas'ud. The Abdullah Mas'ud school is the Hanafi school. His students and grand students formed the Hanafi school. The Hanafi school is just a word, we call it Hanafi because of Imam Abu Hanifa. It's not the fatwa of Imam Abu Hanifa. It's what happened before and after Imam Abu Hanifa is the Hanafi school. So here, this is from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and he said the Prophet ﷺ used to give one salam of peace to his right, and one salam given to his left, saying, peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. That's the Hanafi school, that's the Hanafi school. Right? And so that's also great. Ibn Umar, and this is important, okay? So far we said hadith, but is it important to look at what the Sahaba and Tabi'een did? Very much. Ibn Umar diligently and carefully followed the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He didn't just do things of his own accord. So Ibn Umar would say Assalamu alaikum to his right. And then Assalamu alaikum to forward to the Imam. And then if someone had greeted him to his left, he would respond to them. So if I'm standing in the middle, so let's say I'm on to the right, the Imam is over here. I'm going to say Assalamu alaikum to my right, and then Assalamu alaikum to my left, because that's the Imam, and to my left. If I'm over here, Assalamu alaikum, because I'm responding to everybody to my right. There's nobody to my left. What if I'm in the middle? Assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum. And you're like, astaghfirullah, what are you doing? I am doing something that I know and you are ignorant about. And you're like, there's no hadith. True, there is no hadith. But isn't Ibn Umar's action, isn't that indicative of the Sunnah? Would he make up the deen? Or is this something that maybe he had seen done and hadn't been quoted from the Prophet ﷺ? So you cannot assume that this is right and you cannot assume that it's wrong. You have to say, I respect that and weigh it up. So the Shafi'is, they say no. Majority of scholars say no, you just give 2 salams, that's it. I don't know what he's doing. Maybe it's his own opinion, I'm not sure. Right? They follow other evidence. But you cannot ignore this. You can't say this bid'ah and it's wrong and it's crazy. You can't do that. You can say, some scholars weighed this, some weighed it that way. That's all you can say. The issue of weighing up what's the most likely position. Next slide, please. So 1, 2, or 3, there's evidence for all of them. Next slide, please. Okay, where when I stand in prayer, do I stand like this? Or 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 do I stand like this? It's all wrong. It's all right. How does it work? Okay, next slide, please. So what I'm going to, before you go to the next slide, sorry. So what I'm going to show is there are these 5 positions, but you will see that the former dhahib, they follow what the majority of the Sahaba did. Okay? It's very important. So bismillah, look at the next hadith, please. Next slide. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. Ibn Sayyidina Ali and Ibn Abbas, they explained it by praying like this. Right? And there's actually one narration where Sayyidina Ali, he said it's like this. He described it like this. And he actually put his hand on his chest, ala sadrihi. Right? Is it sahih? Is it not sahih? That's last week's discussion. How authentic is it from Sayyidina Ali? That's something else. Did he actually say that? Did he not say that? What did he mean? Again, that's a whole other discussion. But anyway, at least it exists. But you can imagine say somebody, so if I pray like this, is there evidence for it? There's evidence in the Quran to say this. This is called your nahar in Arabic. Right? Yawm al-nahar is you slaughter like this. This is nahar. Right? So put your hand on your neck. There's evidence for that. Did many of the Sahaba do that? No. Next slide, please. So not narrated from any of the Sahaba that they put their hands on their neck. So surprise, surprise, there's a verse of the Quran, yet because nobody applied it, nobody does it like that. Right? And the normal tafsir of it is one har means slaughter. Doesn't mean put your hand on your neck in prayer. Okay, so we're comparing, here's the hadith of the Quran against Sahaba and Tabi'een. Here there's no comparison, so we're kind of ignored. You don't find anybody praying like this. Next slide. He put his right hand or arm, this is called yad in Arabic, so I'm translating it this, over his left arm or hand on his chest. So this is narrated by Sahih Ibn Khuzaymah. Ibn Khuzaymah, 4th century hadith scholar, 2nd generation Shafi'i. And so he says on his chest, that would mean praying like this. And this is the only hadith, that we have, basically. This is why we see people praying like this today. Because they say, there's a hadith. Okay, so therefore we pray like this. Let's compare it to the Sahaba. Next slide. Not narrated from any of the prophetic companions. So you don't find Sahaba and Tabi'een praying like that. Right? When Imam Nawawi summarized the positions, he didn't even mention it. He doesn't mention this and doesn't even mention this. Because it didn't exist. Right? Shaykh Albani, rahimahullah, somebody who promoted the idea of following Quran and Sunnah only, in his book, he said it is Sunnah to pray like this. He said the Prophet prayed like this. It's in Sahih Ibn Khuzaymah, etc. Okay? And so who does he quote? He quotes one 3rd century scholar that used to do that. So it's not like the Sahaba, brother Dr. Rashid was asking the question, well, isn't it mutawatir? Shouldn't we see Sahaba and Tabi'een do things? Yes. So they were praying, right? They were praying in different ways. So we must be familiar. Are we familiar with people praying like this? No. That's why none of the madhahib say to pray like that. So then somebody comes like, yeah, but the hadith. So yeah, but let's look at the Sahaba and Tabi'een. Maybe they understood things in different ways. So I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm saying it's very unlikely that you're right. And so again, how do I become extremist? Kafir. Extremist, you're wrong. Right? So whenever I have that approach, it's wrong. We're trying to understand pluralism, right? But also understanding why would the majority of scholars not do that? There's a quote, Bayhaqi in the Kubra, he mentions that Sayyidina Ali did that. He said, when you one har means this, and then he put his hands like this. So maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. And maybe that's true, Sayyidina Ali did it, and maybe Sayyidina Ali understood it properly, and maybe the hadith is sahih, maybe, but maybe not. Okay, next slide, please. Another version of the same hadith says he put his right hand or arm over his left hand or arm beneath his chest, عند صدره. So that same hadith, so على صدره عند صدره. So this is the Shafi school. We do like this. So again, why do we do this? Because we also have evidence from the Sahaba and Tabi'een. If you go next slide. Right? Sa'id ibn Jubair, one of the great fuqaha of Mecca, he was asked, where do you put your hand? You say, above your belly button. Well, is this not above my belly button? Right? So therefore we have a hadith and we have some of the Sahaba and Tabi'een explaining it like this. Right? Next slide, please. Right? However, the majority opinion is this. And we'll explain why. Next slide. One should put one's, so Ibrahim al-Nakhai, why are we quoting him again and again? Because everyone's like going to him for fatwa. He is one of the most important fatwa muftis of the Tabi'een. He said one should put one's right hand over one's left hand beneath the navel, like this. That's why we say Hanafi, Ibrahim Nakhai is the same thing. Next slide, please. Abu Mijlaz as well of the Tabi'een, he said as well, one should put the palm of one's right hand over the left hand in prayer beneath the navel. Same thing. Al-Bayhaqi quotes with a weak chain transmission from Sayyidina Ali saying that is Sunnah, eye of the Prophet ﷺ, to put one's hand over the other beneath the navel. Again, same thing. Right? Next slide. Okay, what about putting hands towards sides? So far we discussed this, 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 and this. We said this is basically backed up by nobody of the Sahaba and Tabi'een. Even though it's in the Quran. If you want to quote a source, it's in the Quran. But nobody applied it. Why? Because they didn't see the Sahaba praying like that. Okay? Or praying like this. There's a Sahih Hadith. Fine. But we don't really find any of the Sahaba doing it. So that's why we kind of ignore it. Why do we say this? Well, there's a Hadith and it's backed up by Sahaba and Tabi'een. Why do we say this? Because there's a Hadith and it's backed up by Sahaba and Tabi'een. Okay, next slide. Right? Ibrahim al-Nakhai, he used to leave his hands unfolded in prayer, like this. So maybe he used to pray like this. He said this is Sunnah, but he also did this. Right? He's also doing like this. Okay? You have to understand, where did the Shia originally come from? The Shia originally came from Iraq. So there can be some things that the Shia do, and you'd be like, oh, that's what the Shia do. It's like, yeah, because it's the same teachers sometimes. Right? Next slide. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, right? This is the great, one of the first of the Sahaba born in Medina. He was a baby, small child at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. He said he used to leave his hands unfolded in prayer, like this. So like bid'ah, you pray like a Shi'i. It's like, yeah, I'm praying like a Shi'i, but also Sahaba and Tabi'een prayed like this. So like, I'm not doing something wrong, right? So if he came along and said, it is Sunnah to pray like this, there's evidence to pray like that, yes. One of the students of Sa'id ibn Musayyib, remember we just quoted him before, how important he is in the fiqh. He's such an important person. So I never did I see Sa'id ibn Musayyib holding his right hand in prayer. He used to let it go by his side. He used to pray like this with his hand by his side. So again, in Medina, surprise, surprise, the Maliki school, which comes from Medina, is going to say, yeah, you pray like this. No surprise. Next slide, please. Imam Ibn Qasim asked his teacher, Imam Malik, he says, I am not familiar with it in the obligatory prayer, meaning I haven't seen the people in Medina. So who is Imam Malik? Imam Malik studied with the Tabi'een. So he's looking at Ibn Nafi', for example, the freed slave of Ibn Umar, who we just saw before, that was Nafi'. That was his teacher, right? And other people like that. He's studying with the people around the family and extended family of Aisha radiallahu anha, the family and extended family of Ibn Umar, of Sayyidina Umar, the family and extended family of Abu Huraira, of Zayd ibn Thabit, etc. Right? So he said, when I'm seeing the Tabi'een in Medina, who diligently and carefully followed the way of the Sahaba, who diligently and carefully followed the Prophet ﷺ, I've never seen people pray like this in the thought of prayer. I've never seen it. They always pray like this in the fard prayer. When they're praying sunnahs, yeah, sometimes like this, yeah. But in the fard, we've never seen it. This is what we've seen, right? So is that not an indication of the sunnah? Of course it's an indication of the sunnah. But when they quote the hadith, you're not going to find that. That's not in a hadith book because it's not a hadith. So when you equate Quran, when you equate sunnah with hadith, you get confused. So when you say the receipt is the sale, the receipt is not the sale. The receipt is a proof of the sale. Not the same thing. The blood pressure going number on the screen is not the same as my blood pressure. It might be wrong. It might be, I don't know, oversensitive. I don't know. The fact that my pulse is gone doesn't mean I'm dead. Here I am, I'm talking to you, right? I don't have to be dead. Maybe the machine doesn't work. So they're not the same thing. So somebody who comes to this and says, there's no hadith. You don't need a hadith. You need to have something that tells you about the sunnah. How does that not tell you about the sunnah? If you were at that time in Medina, you come to Medina and you said, here's somebody who's been here, we've never seen people praying in the fard like this. They only pray like this. Then clearly we have a conflict between the hadith that we just read, right, and this. There's a conflict of sunnah versus sunnah, and how I put it together, obviously we're going to have a difference of agreement. You think Prophet did it, I don't know who Imam Malik is, ignore. Which is kibr, pride, or ignorance. Ignorance, your excuse. I didn't know. I had no idea about this book. What's the Mudawwan? I never heard of it in my life. That's fine. Right? But at least you should have the humility to say, well, scholars say difference of reason. There must be a reason for that. Right? But if you review the concept here, there's evidence for all of them. So you can't say which one is right and which is wrong. But why is it that, for example, the Shafi'is, they pray like this, the Hanbalis, they pray like this, the Hanafis, they pray like this, and the Malikis pray like this, but nobody said this. Nobody really said that. It's like a thing you don't find among the Sahaba and Tabi'een. None of the former dhahib said you pray like this or pray like this, because the former dhahib is based on the fiqh of the Sahaba and Tabi'een. Whereas fiqh dalil, people say, where's the dalil? Where's the dalil? Where's the dalil? It's just a new deen, right? And they don't compare the Quran and Sunnah against the Sahaba and Tabi'een. Okay, next slide, please. What if the prayer has started for Fajr? Right, I believe this is the last discussion, inshallah. We won't go for too long. What if the prayer has started for Fajr and I haven't prayed my 2 rakats? Okay, classic fight in the masjid. Okay, wrestle, we're going to definitely take this outside, turn to a fight after the masjid. Okay, so the prayer has started, I come to Fajr, but I haven't prayed my 2 rakats before Fajr. What do I do? Okay, first hadith. So in Sahih Muslim, you say, brother, it's simple. Listen to hadith. Listen to sunnah. See, he thinks they're the same thing. He quotes a hadith. He says, the Prophet ﷺ said, when the prayer commences, let there be no prayer except the obligatory prayer. Does that make sense to you? Makes sense to me. Khalas, the Prophet ﷺ said it, it's clear, you're a kafir. Or at least doing something haram. Why are you praying your sunnahs while the imam is praying? It's wrong. Oh, Maliki says you do it. What's Maliki? The Prophet ﷺ said this. Or the Hanafi say it. Huh? The Prophet ﷺ said this. Why do you care about Hanafi? What's Hanafi? What does that even mean? Okay? And again, it's ignorance of the conflicting evidence. Ignorance of the fact that there is evidence from the Sahaba and Tabi'een that you should do that. Okay? So the position of the Shafi'is is, no, that's exactly that. There's the hadith, and the Shafi'is say, yeah, the Sahaba said this, the Sahaba said that, but we're going to go with what some of the Sahaba said over the others. But that doesn't mean we're right and they're wrong. It means this is more likely according to some, and that's more likely according to others. Next slide, please. So Abu Darda, he said, I swear that if I entered the mosque and I found people in prayer, I would head to a pillar in the mosque and I would pray the 2 rakats and I would do them properly without hastening. I wouldn't be rushing. I'd do them properly. Then I would go and pray Fajr with everybody else. So Abu Darda is not a faqih, he's a sahabi, for crying out loud. This is a sahabi. So he doesn't know the deen, he doesn't know the sunnah. Why is he saying, I swear? Why is he speaking so emphatically? Surely he's heard this and he's seen things. Is he careless about the deen? Does he just give fatwa like this? No. So is this not an evidence? It's not a hadith, brother. It's an evidence. It's indicative of the sunnah. So this is evidence against the hadith. Next slide. Masruq, one of the great, again, people of the builders of the Hanafi school, one of the tabi'een of Kufa, he said he used to pray them even if the imam was standing in prayer in the mosque. Okay. Next slide, please. Hasan al-Basri, again, one of the great fuqaha of Basra and a great fuqaha of the Salaf, Tabi'een, he said, if you enter the mosque while the Imam is praying and you haven't prayed the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr, then pray them and then join the Imam in prayer. Oh, again, 1, 2, 3 fatwas against the hadith. So he doesn't know about the deen. He's a tabi'i, he studied with the Sahaba. He would only be saying this if he saw people. He's not going to give a fatwa for no reason. Next slide, please. Okay, there's other things as well, but so the point is, I'm surprised, I don't understand, why are you doing this? And I say Hanafi. I'm like, what's Hanafi? This is the Quran, this is Sunnah, that's it. So yeah, but this is also Quran and Sunnah. And so the issue is, the Hanafis and Malikis, they looked at some evidence, okay? I believe there's another slide that I missed, whatever. And the Shafis look at another way. The Shafis who say, we don't think you should pray the 2 rak'ahs, but we might be wrong. The Malikis say, we think you should pray the 2 rak'ahs, but we might be wrong. And this is good. As opposed to, dude, it says it, the Prophet said this, you're wrong. Or you have to be Hanafi, we have to be Maliki. Like, there's evidence for both sides, but you have to be aware of the evidence, and particularly you have to be aware of what the Sahaba and Tabi'een did and said. Otherwise, you're going to be confused because you don't see the conflict. You think it's simple, it's obvious, because you don't see this, because you don't have all the evidence. Inshallah, any quick questions?
A quick question. So we have hadith like Imam Bukhari, and then we are saying Sahabi and Tabi'een, and they have said something. So can we consider those also hadith, or?
Technically speaking, no. But indirectly, yes. So is it a hadith? Meaning, are you quoting the Prophet ﷺ? No. Right? But you have to understand, so, but does it tell you about halal haram? Yes. Does it tell you, because I can make the assumption, he's only saying this because he's seen Sahaba and Tabi'een do it. He's only seeing that because they saw the Prophet ﷺ do it. Right? And so you could, so for Imam Shafi'i, so you have to understand the 6 books are written by Shafi'is or people who are like Shafi'is. So that's why the main content of those 6 books is only words of the Prophet ﷺ and actions of the Prophet ﷺ. Because Imam Shafi'i said, if I have a hadith, I will not leave a hadith for unless there's another hadith. That's Imam Shafi'i's approach. But he says, I might be wrong in my approach. Imam Malik says, if the hadith says one thing, but the people of Medina do something else, I'm going to go with Medina. Because that's a better preservation of the Sunnah. So he himself will quote a hadith and do the opposite. So he says, Imam Malik he himself said he tells us that it's Sunnah to pray like this. But then he said, I've never seen anybody in Medina do that. So which is a better record of the Sunnah, what they do in Medina or the hadith that was told to him? He says, better record is the Medina. These people are the strongest people against bid'ah and the most careful people about following the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is where the Prophet ﷺ prayed, and this is where he called the adhan, and this is every single thing. When you say, for example, that when you're going to give the mud on Eid, you give a, right? He says, I have it here. Look, this is the same container that they used. I'm standing in the same place, right? And so the issue, so do we call it hadith? No, we don't call it hadith, but it can be practically used in fiqh as a hadith, according to some. And you get confused when you don't see it. That's why. So importantly, the 6 books are not the deen. The 6 books are a presentation of the deen based on a certain methodology.
One last one.
Bismillah.
Ibrahim, what was his name?
Ibrahim al-Nakha'i.
Ibrahim al-Nakhai.
Yes.
Was he direct
So he used
teacher
to visit. He was as a young man. He used to visit Aisha radiallahu anha with his family. So he's of that era. So I think she passed away in in 50. I think she passed away in 50 or 51. And so he's going to be alive at that kind of time, right? But the point is, he's giving fatwa during the time of the Sahaba. He's a mufti for the Sahaba.
And then
So if the Sahaba use him as a proof for halal haram, shouldn't I use him as a proof for halal haram? So now you're confused. You're like, there is no hadith for what you're saying. There is no this. It's like, yeah, but Ibrahim Nakhai said it, khalas. That's good enough for me. I can use that on Judgment Day. I can say, wallahi, Allah, the Sahaba were happy with him. How about me? Right?
that means
So he's his grand student of a student. But he doesn't always agree because Imam Hanifa is a mujtahid. But generally speaking, like, we'll talk about that in the other class, development of fiqh and these things, right? But the point is, if you're not aware of what the, so Tarawih is the best example. There's no hadith, and yet everybody says 20. That doesn't make any sense. Where'd you get 20 from? And you say, because you are ignorant of the evidence. It's just like a search, it's like using a search, right, on software. And you did, for example, you didn't realize that it had selected something. It's like, why doesn't this name turn up? It's like, because you clicked male. Oh, that's why the females don't turn up. Like you say, why is it there only 2 people in this class? It's like, there are 2 people in this class, there's 10. But, oh, because you clicked male, unclick male. Oh, suddenly this other data comes up. The same thing. So what they do is they cut out data. I want this. It has to be this. It's like, but this other data that's super important. That's very important. The Mudawwana is not a collection of hadith. The Mudawwana is fiqh questions put by Ibn Qasim to Imam Malik. But in it, there's record of a Sunnah. And you didn't read that book. Yeah, I didn't read that book. It's a big book. Of course I'm not going to read it. I don't want to study it. Why would I care about some questions put to Imam Malik? But you find these things. Right? And so the point is, the less you know, the more narrow-minded you're going to be. The more you know, the more pluralistic you're going to be. Inshallah ta'ala. Shall we stop there, inshallah ta'ala? Subhanallah wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.